Okay, welcome to Psych 200 Research Methods. Today we're going to talk about how to present your research. And what this means mostly is we're talking about, how you write that research report. There's a little bit at the end about, how to do a conference and a poster presentation, right? That's at the end, but that won't be today. Okay, mostly how to write your paper. So let's get to it. First of all, what is a research report? That's what you guys have to come up with. Several weeks from now, a research report. So it's a written description of a research study that includes these components, okay? You need a clear statement about the purpose of your research, right? Why did you do it? Okay, what was the purpose of it, right? You need to review the relevant background literature that led to the research study. That will mostly go in the introduction, okay? You need a description of the methods that you use. That would be the method section. You need a summary of your research results. That's the results section. And you need to discuss and interpret the results. That's the discussion section. We're not mentioning here the title page. Yes, there's a title page, the abstract, right? That's the second page, and the references. But this is just a description of the research report, the body of your paper. The introduction, that includes the review of the literature, and a clear statement about why you're doing the research that you're doing, or why you did it, right? And then there's the method section, the results section, discussion section. That's the body of your paper. That is what a research report is. Let's keep going. Some guidelines, okay? APA guidelines. Yes, you have to write your paper in APA style, okay? Please don't use some other style, okay? It's APA guidelines, okay? This is a psychology class, American Psychological Association. If you use MLA style or anything else, your paper is going to be awful. You're going to lose a bunch of points, okay? I'm warning you guys about that. APA guidelines are specific, and that's what I'm going to be looking for. Anything that is different is going to be wrong. Okay, so some APA guidelines here. And by the way, there's a whole manual of this stuff that's hundreds of pages long, okay? We're only gonna go over a few things, okay? We're not gonna go over every single detail, because if we did that, that would be an entire class on just APA style. And such classes do exist, not here, but they do exist. But just to tell you how much detail is involved in that manual, okay? We're only gonna go over a few things. So some elements of writing style. How do you write an APA style, okay? You have to write in an objective style. That means it's basically scientific writing, okay? It's not an essay, okay? It's not an English class. There's no alliteration, no rhyming, okay? No delivered ambiguity, no keeping the, the reader guessing until the end of the story, okay? It's not a movie, right? It's not some kind of creative, short story. It's nothing like that, okay? It's very clear and to the point. Some would say it's boring, okay? But it's very scientific, okay? No abrupt changes in topic, okay? It's not an essay, not a creative writing story, nothing like that. It is just, this is what was done, this is what we found, this is what it means, okay? Something like that, okay? Avoid colloquial expressions, right? Avoid things like once in the blue moon, or things like, oh, we killed, two birds with one stone. Like, no, that is slang, okay? That is not the kind of writing that you use when you write a research article, okay? So avoid things like that. You have to use proper language. And how do you know what language to use? How do you know what proper language is? Well, look at the research articles and the books that you're reading, right? To inform yourself of your topic, right? That is proper language for the most part. Unless you're reading some other book that somebody wrote somewhere who doesn't know what they're talking about, right? But for the most part, if you stick to the reputable sources that I told you guys to look for, you will see proper language there. And the more you read about things in a certain style, like the more scientific writing that you read, the better you get at doing that kind of writing. If you read a lot of stuff that's kind of creative, right, then you learn how to write creatively, but you need to learn how to write like a scientist, okay? And you need to avoid things like that. Other guidelines, other elements of APA style, use third person, okay? This is not an essay. Do not use words like I or me, or even you, or that kind of stuff, okay? You don't say, I did the research, okay? You don't write that way. You're supposed to write, the research was conducted, okay? The results showed, not like my results showed. No, it's not about you, okay? Even though you wrote it, you did the work, you don't write this in the first person. It's not an essay. You write it in the third person. It's okay to use words like we, if you're a part of a team, right? In graduate school, you are, when you do some research, right? We conducted the study, by doing this, this, and this, right? That's okay. But in this case, it's only you. So we wouldn't be appropriate, but you don't use me or I or things like that. Right in the third person. Refer to yourself as if you were somebody else, okay? Verb tense, you write your paper for the most part in past tense. The research was conducted. The results showed, those kind of things like that. There is an exception to that. You should use present tense for the discussion, like the data suggests. This reveals, right? The discussion is in present tense, but everything else is in past tense. Okay, and these things should be kind of obvious if you read anything that's scientific. If you've looked at any research articles, you've seen that they're written this way. Here's some other things. A lot of these things are obvious, but avoid biased language. Okay, scientific writing should be free of implied or irrelevant evaluation of groups. That means that don't be biased in your writing. Don't refer to people in ways that indicate that you think that they're bad or that you don't like them. Don't get political or anything like that. Okay. So guidelines for avoiding biased language. Okay. Describe people with the level of specificity that is accurate. In other words, just use the proper language. Okay. You don't call people drunks. Okay. That infers that basically says that you don't like them, right? He or she is a drunk, right? These participants were drunks. No, you said, okay, so if you did a study involving alcohol, you say intoxicated participants, and then whatever happened, okay? Intoxicated, not drunks. Don't use words like high or stoned or things like that. It's like, no, those, intoxication refers to many things. Could refer to alcohol or intoxication with marijuana, but you need to use proper language. Be sensitive to labels. Call people, what they prefer to be called. Okay. Believe it or not, even saying that people are elderly is considered biased. Okay. Elderly, or even just calling people old. So you don't say that people are old, you say that they are older. Okay. It's just you need to be polite in the way you refer to people. With the issue with if you have anything there about sexual orientation, there are proper labels for that. Okay. Whether it's, homosexuality, heterosexuality, things like that. You don't use those other terms that are derogatory that other people like to throw around, which tells us that they don't like those kind of people. Okay. Don't write that way. Don't be that way. Okay. Acknowledge people's participation in the study. You have to say, in past tense, people completed the survey, stuff like that. That goes without saying, but, avoid biased language. You have to ask yourself if the way you're writing basically, is a bit impolite or is saying something that you're referring to people in a way that, would be derogatory or in a way that just doesn't sound right. All right, now we're going to talk about stuff that's even less interesting. Okay, we're going to talk about citations. Okay, how to give credit to the authors. Notice, right, this is a research paper. It is not an essay. I should see citations in your paper. And I told you guys, it's on the syllabus, that the writing, right, that your paper basically needs to refer to at least 5 sources. That means 5 different citations. That's the minimum. You could have more, but you need citations. It's not an essay. It's not where you just write about what you know. You are going to write about what other people have said about your topic, okay, in the introduction. And of course, you're also going to have your own work, right? And you're going to describe your own work, but you're going to have to cite, okay? You're going to have to refer to other authors. So you need to identify the authors and the year of the publication, right? For a specific fact or idea that's mentioned in the research report. Anything that's like a fact, like let's say that, or something that was shown in research. Like, let's say you write something like, research shows that, 12% of females are depressed, right? Somebody did that research. Somebody showed that. You need to give credit to the author. Okay, that's not your own study. Okay, if you say something like, just thinking off the top of my head here, like, cognitive behavioral therapy can be useful for treating depression. Guess what? That's an opinion. it could be supported by research, but you need to give credit to the author, okay? You don't know that for sure. You read that somewhere, okay? You haven't done that work. So you need to give credit to the author for anything that's not your own, okay? Any ideas that's not your own, any research, whenever there's any stats mentioned, any percentages, any numbers or anything like that, that means that came from somewhere. Give credit to the author. You need to provide enough information for the reader to locate the full reference, okay, in the list of references at the end of the research report. So you need to provide enough information so that if the reader wants to basically look up that source, you know, later on they can. And this is the way you provide, you know, the reader with a proper citation. Okay, you can cite at the end or you can cite at the beginning. Okay, so you can state a fact or make a claim in the text. Okay, so you can cite, for instance, the source in parentheses within the same sentences. You can say like, you know, results showed blah, blah, blah. And then you can cite at the end in parentheses, author's last name, comma, space, the year in which the work was published. Okay. And you can also give credit to the author up front. You can use the source, that is the author, right, as the subject of the sentence, you know. You could put the author's, so here the author's name appear within the body of the sentence, and only the year of publication is not in parentheses. So you can do it up front, right? Jones, 2008 in parentheses, showed that, and then whatever they said. So you can give them credit at the end, give them credit up front. Okay, if you give them credit at the end, that means you make some statement, right? And by the way, you write this in your own words, okay? Or if you just refer to the authors, the author said this, then you indicate the authors up front. Other rules for references, be conservative, okay? Choose references directly relevant to the study you're presenting. When you do your literature review, okay, you need to mention research that basically is relevant to your topic. You might run into things that are not relevant, okay? That shouldn't be a part of it, okay? That goes without saying, okay? That's obvious. But you need to describe and explain your study, right? Do not try to read and write everything that is related. You're gonna find way too much stuff, let's say on depression, if that's what your study's about, or about self-esteem. You don't have to talk about everything. Select only those references that are useful and contribute to your arguments. So you're gonna cite those authors who say something that you wanna cover on your paper. Use of citations, as a general rule, you need to paraphrase, right? A point using your own words rather than quoting directly, okay? So when you give credit to the author, you're using a citation, you are still, writing things in your own words. Sometimes students forget that, but you have to write things in your own words, okay? Only when it's a quote, you use the author's exact words, okay? Use direct quotations only when it is necessary to preserve the whole essence of the original statement. Use of quotations is used sparingly. That's usually something that's not done when you write a research report. It's just not something that's done very commonly when you're using APA style. It's used more commonly in an English class, not so much in psychology. Look through your textbook and you'll see how many quotes do you see? Almost none. You might not find any, okay? You use citations. And by the way, if you use a bunch of quotation marks, a bunch of quotations, it tells me that you don't really know what you're talking about and you're just trying to quote your way through the paper, okay? But use your own words and give credit to the author. Quotations are not used that often. Now let's talk about quotations, okay? We're still going to talk about quotations, even though you probably are not going to use them, okay? But you should know how they're done, okay? So when you quote something, you use the same words the author used, okay? The exact same words, okay? So you must include quotation marks, and you still have to cite. You use the author's last name, year, and then because it's a quote, you also add the page number. And here's an example here. And I tend to use the same examples in some of my other classes, so some of you might have seen this before, right? But we have quotes here on what the author said, the author's own words. Research indicates that reaction time improved on subsequent trials, right? And then we give credit to the author at the end, and then parentheses, Rogers, comma, space, the year in which the work was published, comma, another space, P dot, and then the page number, and then the end, the other part of the quotation of the parentheses, and then the period. Notice the period goes at the end. The period does not go, at the end of what the author said. It goes at the end of the citation. If you give the citation at the end. please cite correctly. Do not forget the page number. And notice it says P dot. It doesn't say page or capital P. It's little p dot, right? Do it exactly this way or it's going to be wrong and you're going to lose points. Here's some, examples of citations. We talked about the first one already, right? It's different if you have different authors. If you have one author, and you cite in the text, it's like Jones 2008, right? You cite up front. In parentheses at the end, it's Jones, comma, space, 2008, that in parentheses. If you have two authors, if it's in the text, if you say Smith and Jones 2009, showed this, right? Then it's that way, right? All right, Smith and Jones. No, notice A and D, right? There's no first initials there. Okay, I don't want to see John Smith or Mary Ann Jones or anything like that. There's no first names. Okay, no first initials. You don't do that with APA style. Okay, that information goes in the references. Okay, but even there, you don't write the whole name, just the first initial. If you're going to do it in parentheses at the end with two authors, it's Smith and Jones, comma, space, 2009. Notice when it's in parentheses, you use that little thing called an ampersand. If it's outside the parentheses, you use A and D. Okay, there's a difference there. If you have three or more authors, you can use Jones et al. Okay, and then the year in which it was published, right? Jones et al. Said this. If it's in parentheses, Jones et al., the dot there, the comma, space, and then the year. Use et al. Correctly. The rules have been changed recently. Okay, you can use et al. Now from the very beginning if there are three or more authors. In the past, they used to require that you write all the authors first, and then you can use et al. Now you can use et al. From the very beginning, but if you're going to use et al., use it correctly. It's et space al dot. Okay, and then if you have the year in parentheses, right, that's the way it looks. If you have the whole thing in parentheses, then you need a comma after the al dot. Okay, then a space, then the year. Et al. Is for Latin, like, and others. Other guidelines for typing or word processing, other guidelines for your paper, right? Manuscript settings, right? It needs to be double spaced, okay? Not single spaced, not 1.5, not 2.5, exactly double spaced, okay? And those are usually the default settings when you write a paper anyway. You need 1-inch margins all the way around, okay? I don't want to see these 2-inch, I don't want to see 2-inch margins or 1/2 inch. 1-inch margins. Those are usually the default settings. Okay, so usually don't even have to mess with those. It has to be left aligned with hyphenation. That means that, when you write a paragraph, it's aligned on the left, okay, and then you go toward the right. And if it ends before the, before the margin, it's okay. There's a little space left there. Okay, it should not be centered. If you have headings like introduction, method, results, those will be centered, but not the paragraphs, okay? That'll look messy if you do it that way, okay? Make sure it's left aligned without any hyphens, okay? Indent the first line of each paragraph. Indent the first line of each paragraph, except the abstract, by the way. The abstract has no indent, okay? And if you have read any research, you might have seen stuff like that. Actually, I do want to point out there's some older research where the abstract does have an indent. The current rules do not ask for an indent. Do not indent the abstract, but all the other paragraphs in the body of your paper should have an indent. Typeface, right? Use 12 font, right? 12 point, 12 font times New Roman. Okay, not 10 font, not 18 font. Don't use a bigger font to make your paper look longer than it actually is. Okay, and I did tell you guys that your paper, can be anywhere from like 7 to 10 pages, and that information's on your syllabus. Other information about your paper: how do you organize your manuscript, right? How do you organize the paper? This is on the syllabus as well, but you need a title page, you need an abstract, and then there's the text, the body of your paper, which includes the introduction, method, results, discussion, right? That's the most important part of your paper. And then there are references. And if there's any tables, figures, appendices, those go at the end. Okay, after the references. If there's any tables, they go right after the references. If there's figures, those go next. If there's appendices, those go at the end. You don't really need tables, figures. I really don't want to see that. Okay, your research is not going to be that detailed that you're going to need that stuff, but you might need an appendix. in order to refer, let's say, to a questionnaire, let's say, like if you're using a scale, let's say a self-esteem scale, you could write in the method section, you know, that a self-esteem, so-and-so self-esteem scale was used, and you cite, you know, and you said there were questions about this, questions about that, and questions about this, and you say something like see appendix A or something for complete survey. And then that appendix will be at the end, and you see all the questions. But I really don't want to see tables and figures. So what does the title page look like? I want you to follow the example I'm going to show you guys, okay? So, you know, otherwise you're going to lose some points. So the title page is the first page, okay? You need a running head, okay? The running head is an abbreviated title. I'll show you an example in a moment. But all the words in your, not all the words, but all the words in your running head should appear on your title, but it shouldn't be all the words, okay? If the title of your paper is Depression Among Adolescents, then the running head would be something like depression, or maybe adolescence, a shortened version of your title, okay? And by the way, when you see the example, you'll see that the shortened version of your title, the running head should be all capitalized, okay? Okay, so after the running head, you need the running head, and you need a page number all the way on the right, okay? And then there's the title of your paper, then there's the author's name, your name, okay? And then and then there's an affiliation, that would be the school. That for you guys, that would be Antelope Valley College. You write that in there. Author note, you don't really need that, okay? Leave that out. But if you were to be writing something for publication, you might have an author note just for information there, but you don't need an author note. You can leave that out for the paper. This is what a title page looks like. I know you can't really see that very well because it's small. I will be showing you an example after the lecture. Hopefully we'll have some time. I think we will. But if you can kind of see there, the running head is a shortened version of the title, and it's all the way on the top on the left. Okay, all the words are capitalized, and then there's a page number all the way on the upper right. Okay, and then there's the title of your paper. Okay, every major word is capitalized. Then there's your name, and then there's the institution, right? That would say something like Antelope Valley College. For this particular person, you can't really see there, but I think it was another college. But I'll show you an example that you can actually see after I stop recording. That's just like an image there. So we talked about the title page. Now, the second page of your paper will be the abstract. What does your abstract look like? Okay, what does the abstract include? Okay, by the way, the abstract, like I said, it's the second page, and the abstract is kind of like a summary of your paper, okay? And if I were you, I would write it last. After you've written the whole thing, then it should be clear what should go in the abstract. But the abstract includes, for instance, a one-sentence statement about the problem or the research question. Something like, this particular study sought to do this and this, okay? Something like that. Brief description of the participants. Participants included, 60 individuals from Antelope Valley College. A brief description about the research method. A survey was used, a survey with, these types of questions. Or just a survey was used to, gather information. A report of the results. Results showed this and this, just very briefly, right? And a statement about the conclusions or implications. The results are discussed, something like that. To keep it simple, you know what you can do? You could have, like I said, one sentence about the statement or research question, one sentence about what the study's about, one sentence about the participants, one sentence about the method, one sentence about the results, and one sentence about the discussion. There it is, 5 sentences that will cover your abstract, right? If you want to do it right. Believe it or not, it takes practice to write a good abstract, and it's something you won't really know how to do very well until you're in graduate school. But here, this is what I'm asking for. And if you do something like that, then you should get full credit. If there are problems, then you're going to lose points. And here's an example of an abstract. Notice we still have the running head. We still have the page number, right? It says abstract at the top. Starts with a capital. Abstract starts with a capital. All the rest is lowercase. And then there is that abstract there. Notice it does not have an indent. It's the only paragraph that doesn't have an indent. I'll show you guys an example after I stop recording. I know this is hard to see because that's just an image there. The introduction. The introduction comes after the abstract. The introduction is probably the longest section of your paper, okay, of your research report. This is the part where you basically summarize research related to your topic, okay? So the components of the introduction include a general introduction to the topic. You talk about the topic and you define anything that needs to be defined, okay? Like if you're gonna talk about depression, you know, define depression. If you're gonna talk about child abuse, please define what child abuse is. Don't just assume people know what that is, okay? Need to review the literature, okay? What does the research say about child abuse? What does the research say about depression? Know something about your area. And then, you know, somewhere toward the end of your introduction, you need a statement of the problem or the purpose of the study, okay? You need something that says there basically why you're doing or why you did the study that you did, and identify the, you know, the variables. I'll show you guys an example in a moment, but there's a description of the research strategy and the hypotheses. Sometimes students forget that, but at the end of the introduction, you need to basically introduce your study. Okay, you need to say something about what was done in your study and what you are predicting, at the very least. Okay, the introduction, tell you the truth, it could be a couple of pages, it could be 2 pages, 3 pages. It doesn't have to be that long. Okay, I don't want a 20-page paper overall. Don't give me a 10-page introduction. This is just an introductory class. Keep it brief. A couple of pages is all you need. 2, 3 pages. Don't make it longer than that, okay? But this is usually the longest part of your actual research study, or not the research, but the research report. Here's an example of an introduction. I don't think I'm going to show you the whole thing, but it's the longest part, okay? So again, you have the running head, you have the page number. The introduction would start on page 3. And then you have the title of your actual paper again in bold, okay? And then you have, you know, your literature review right there where you talk about your topic, okay? And by the way, that keeps going on. And then, you know, it's not just usually 1 page, it's usually like 2 or 3 pages. Make it about 2 pages for you guys, right? No more than 3. Okay, I'll show you a real example in a moment. This is just an image, right, to show you a few things, but it's hard to see. The method of your paper. You probably don't have that much experience writing a method section. This is probably the first time you've done research, but this is what you put in a method section, okay? So it's a relatively detailed description of exactly how the variables were defined, right? And measured, and how the research study was conducted. Okay, there's several subsections for your method section, okay? You need to describe your participants, so there's usually a participant subsection. There might be an apparatus section, a material subsection. It says there, if needed, there's a procedure subsection. For you guys, I'll put it to you this way. When you do a survey, which is what you guys are doing, you're gonna need a participant subsection. You're gonna need a section where you describe your participants. You're not gonna have an apparatus section, okay? Because you didn't really use any equipment and things like that. But you are gonna have a material subsection where you describe your survey. And then you're gonna have a procedure subsection where you describe your procedure, right? How you actually selected participants, how you went about acquiring them. We'll talk about that. Those are the 4 sections you could include in your method section, but you probably only need 3: participants, materials, and procedure. I'll show you an example in a moment. Here is actually an example. I want to point something out. Look, notice there how the introduction kind of ends, okay? We still have a header there, we still have a running head, and we still have the page number there. And notice how the introduction ends near the top of the page, and then the method section begins, okay? And it says method, okay? I want to point out that this method section doesn't necessarily start at the top of the page, okay? Don't leave big blanks in, you know, in the body of your paper. Where the introduction ends, that's where the method section begins. Where the method section ends, that's where the results section begins, okay? It doesn't have to be at the top of the page. So there's the method, it says method, and then there's a participant subsection, and then there's materials, and then after that, there'll be a procedure subsection. This is just an image to show you a little bit about what it looks like. That's the method section. Here's another image of the method section, so you can see the rest of it. So so it says method centered over here, right? And then we have participants, then we have materials, and then after that, we have a procedure subsection, and that's usually the end of the method section. After that comes the results, which I'm going to save for next time, by the way, because the results are going to get a little bit more detailed, okay? But now what I want to do is I want to end this, and I want to show you some examples and talk about the example. Okay, this is just the lecture part, and it's kind of hard to see the example here because it's an image on the PowerPoint. Okay, so I will now stop recording.